Wait a minute. What's so amazing about grace?
You are listening to All Things Grace podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Majors. This podcast is dedicated to answering one question: how can we move through life with more ease and flow and grace? How do we bring grace to family drama, our careers, our bodies, and health? What about racism and oppression? Or the most challenging of them all, ourselves? It's all about grace, y'all. Let's talk about it.
Hey everyone, and welcome to All Things Grace podcast. I am so excited to be here because this conversation is a conversation that we all need to really pay attention to, and it's about the imposter syndrome. Joining us today is Whitney Knox Lee. Whitney is a self-described Black mother to Black children, civil rights attorney, and anti-racist and newly minted podcast host, which is why I'm so glad that she's here today, and we'll learn more about that. So Whitney has a strong interest in promoting anti-racism, racial equity, and inclusion in the law, in the workplace, and beyond. So to this end, Whitney works as a consultant to law firms across the country to teach principles of anti-racist and racial justice advocacy to advocates and to help foster cultural humility. Humility, not cultural competence. I hope everybody's listening. Cultural humility and inclusivity within the workplace and amongst legal professionals. So we jam right in the exact same sphere. So I know who you're talking to. I know what you're experiencing. I know all these challenges that you deal with. Having these conversations in one of the deepest, most profound places that injustice lives, and that's in the law. Right. And so I completely understand your world. So I really am curious about this whole thing about imposter syndrome, and specifically your podcast, Impostrix. I'm going to say it. Impostrix.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Impostrix. So tell me a little bit about what is Impostrix? How did you come up with that word? What does it mean? And why now? Why is it important?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I laugh at why Impostrix and what is that, because I thought it was a made-up word, but it actually is in the dictionary. And what it means is the female conjugate of imposter. Why I came up with it is because I knew that I wanted to have a conversation about imposter syndrome, but also about race and about like being an actual imposter, because I think what I experience is both imposter syndrome and feeling like I actually don't belong. Like this system, this space was not meant for me. And I think for me, it's important to acknowledge both of those pieces. But so in talking about these things, I wanted to feel powerful. I didn't want to feel sad and depressed and anxious. So the most powerful word that I could think of was dominatrix. And I combined imposter and dominatrix. So that is, it's not really all that deep. I just liked it. That's the word I came up with. So that's the podcast, Impostrix podcast, and we will launch in July. And the sole purpose of this podcast is to create community amongst professionals of color who deal with navigating their imposter syndrome, but also navigating being a person of color in these professional spaces. Because for me, I'm a lawyer. So in the law, this term professional or professionalism, the first thing that I think, well, not the first thing, but I think about white people, because I think about who created this society in which we show up to work, and this capitalist society, and what we have to look like in order to make money, in order to be successful. And one of the things that I want to kind of explore in the podcast is this idea of like, is there a profession that's like for us by us? And I don't know if there is. I don't know if there is. So that's, in the podcast, we are going to share our personal experiences overcoming imposter syndrome or leveraging imposter syndrome or like shrinking to imposter syndrome, because I think that's part of my experience. We're going to talk about what is white dominant culture, what is racial toxicity, how do I identify it in my workplace, and then we're going to provide tools that people can use for self advocacy and for conflict resolution, so that as we are addressing these issues as they come up, we can do so confidently. And then the final part that I think is really important is the historical context and scientific facts that kind of, I don't know, create the container that we work within. So historical context, meaning like race and racism and what that is and why that is, and capitalism and what that is and why that is. But then also, I've been really interested recently in like the effect of racial trauma has on our body and on our psyche and physiologically. And so I'm interested in talking about that as well.
That's great. That's really good. And so I want to play Angel's Advocate, just throw something out there. Okay.
Yes, Angel's Advocate, do it.
So what about folks who say, when we talk about imposter syndrome, it kind of gives this impression that we internally make up, wow, I am not enough. Or, and listen, we all carry that around our little red wagon of issues, right? We carry all of that through life. So from that standpoint, there is no imposter syndrome because everybody has imposter syndrome, right? So it's just a thing that comes part of our humanity where, in the third grade, Ms. Johnson said, you're never going to be enough. And then you carry that with you, got it. But there are conversations, or some folks feel like when you say imposter syndrome, it's more about you as a person not believing in yourself or thinking that you have the world fooled, because really, you're just a schmuck, right? And so, and it doesn't take into account that, no, systemic bias and exclusion and racism and oppression, all of that adds to that imposter syndrome because we have to act a part, right? So how do we pull apart this idea that, there are things about us that is us, but that's everybody. And this imposter syndrome specifically that targets certain groups because of the ways in which we have to move in the world. And then we have to construct ourselves in the system. Those are both real things. So how would you speak to that?
Yeah, well, okay. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of history around imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome. And if I don't answer your question, then ask it again.
Okay.
So my understanding is that this idea of imposter phenomenon was initially kind of coined to describe something that white women experience, and specifically middle to upper class white women who were considered high achieving. And so there was a study done by Pauline Clance and Susan Imes. They wrote this paper on it in 1978. And this paper talked about who the people were that they were talking to. So it was 150 women. And then it talked about the types of, I guess, the characteristics that they have. And then they gave an opinion as to why these women were dealing with this. So as far as the characteristics, and well, let me start by saying they defined the imposter phenomenon as essentially feeling as though you're intellectually phony. And that what is, a key characteristic of this is that despite all of the objective evidence to the contrary, I feel like I'm intellectually fake or some kind of fraud, and that I fooled everyone around me into thinking otherwise. They say that this is an internal experience, to your point, and that success is attributed to luck when we are living in imposter syndrome, when we are feeling like if I am successful at some area of my life, it's not because I earned it, deserved it, worked hard for it. It's because I got lucky. But when I fail at something, that is because of my lack of ability. And so, although they say that it is an internal experience, what they mean is that it's something like it doesn't matter what you tell me, Dr. Majors, about how amazing I am. Internally, I don't feel that way. But they do say, and I agree, that it is influenced by societal standards and expectations and by your familial upbringing. And even more to your point, I think when we take into account the different experiences and the societal standards of specific groups of people, that I would imagine those groups of people may be more susceptible to imposter syndrome or may experience imposter syndrome differently than white, middle to upper class women with PhDs. So one of the articles that I read recently on Psychology Today just said that around 25 to 30% of high achievers may suffer from imposter syndrome, but around 70% of adults will experience imposterism at least one time in their life. Those numbers seem low to me. Like, who is the 30% that doesn't experience imposter syndrome ever? And like, what are you doing? And how do I do that? Because I absolutely experience it as a Black woman. I experience it in most areas of my life, starting with professionally and academically, but also in my personal life as a mother, comparing myself to others and feeling as though I don't know what I'm doing. And, CPS somewhere is going to realize that I don't know what I'm doing. One of those, like, I can't believe they're letting me take this baby home from the hospital type of situations, So Plants and Imes, they talked about these characteristics and what it might look like to be experiencing imposter syndrome. They talked about overworking or using hard work and diligence to kind of hide their stupidity. They talk about people who hide their true selves. So instead of speaking up about what they actually feel or about their ideas, they will kind of bend to other people, if you will, or lift up the ideas of other people or take on those ideas of other people in order to like really put themselves out there out of this fear of failure. They talk about charm as a way to gain outside approval. And that kind of masking, if I can get this person to like me, and maybe I'm doing that by just being super nice or showing interest in what they're interested in, I can get them invested in me. Then I can start showing who I really am. And if I suck, then at least they love me. They like me. They've already agreed to be my mentor. I'm already working here, so as kind of a way to protect ourselves from being found out. And then they talk about the fear of failure and the fear of guilt and success. And, it's interesting when I think about my own imposter syndrome. I am not super smart. And I don't say that as an imposter. I say that because I got very average grades. I got a very average LSAT score. I got a very average law school grades. Like, I'm just very average. I don't learn well in classrooms. I'm an experiential learner. And so on the one hand, I don't experience, what I am an imposter around is this idea of like a high achieving person, because also one of these like premises of imposter syndrome is that you're a high achieving person. And like, I'm passionate, I've done some things, but like, I was a B, C, really C student, like I'm not one of those A+ students who thinks that they're not worth anything or thinks that they're stupid. No, I'm a C student and I know where
You're just honest with yourself.
Right. And I I know some things. Like I'm all right. I do well for myself.
Mhm.
Um, but I still fall in like even my baseline, I still am like, but I'm not smart enough. I shouldn't be here. I can't believe these people hired me. Like, if they only knew that I don't know what the heck I'm talking about,
Mhm.
even though I do know what I'm talking about, even though I prepared for the thing. Um, but the fear and guilt about success, I think here's where it's important to talk about race and this
Mhm.
intersection because like I said when I started out, like I believe that I experience imposter syndrome, but
Mhm.
that I also just experienced being Black in the United States and being a Black attorney and a Black mother.
Mhm.
Um, and the experience of being Black is one where I grew up swimming in this water
Mhm.
that where everything in the water is telling me, or I don't know, fish languaging to me that I'm not worthy or I'm dumber than white people. I'm lazier than white people. I'm uglier than white people. I have less earning capacity than white people. I'm great for entertainment and sex, but
Mhm.
that's about it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so at the point where I began kind of overperforming
Yeah.
based on these societal standards of I'm less than, is I think for me, where I'm most susceptible to think that I don't belong there.
Mhm.
Because it's not only like the regular comparing myself to other people, but it's also the when I'm doing my thing, I'm actively having to work against everything that I've learned. Even
Mhm.
though my parents were telling me, I'm great, I'm awesome, I'm,
Yeah.
beautiful, all the things.
Yeah.
Um, so I do think that, circling back to your question about it being an internal process
Mhm.
versus, considering the background and the landscape that we're in with everything that's we've experienced in our society as folks of color or as women or as gender nonconforming or trans or whatever
Mhm.
it is. Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are societal standards, there are expectations, there are stereotypes, and if we are operating outside of those things, then um, we're not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Like I'm not supposed to be there. That's not what our founders envisioned for people who look like me.
Mhm. So I want to just pivot a little bit because when you said a few things that really struck me. I think about imposter syndrome in relationships, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how it impacts our ability to love. And as someone who identifies as cisgendered heterosexual, um, I think about how when somebody great comes along, I would turn on. I would turn it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm on. So in order to engage with this person, I had to, again, be the things, again, societally. So good for sex, good for entertainment, good for, right? But even though I knew I would see, you know, him working on his business plan, I'm like, that's not going to fly, dude. You need to do this. You need to stretch out the timeline. You need to, right? And I pulled back from that
Mm-hmm.
stuff and from that kind of engagement or interacting or sharing because my place was as someone to comfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
My whole world is about, do you have enough to sustain you to make it to go fight as a Black man in the world, right? So
Right.
are you eating? Is your environment pleasing? Are you blah 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 blah? And I just invite people to think that that's not all, that's part of the impostoring, right? Is stepping into a role that society says is the role and then letting go of who you are and what you have best to give. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and you just, I won't go, it's a whole nother show about
Mm-hmm.
relationships, Black love,
Mm-hmm.
um, what roles we play. But I learned a lot just since being married. I've learned a lot about, oh, that was just inherently expected that I do those. We never had a conversation that I signed up for that. Oh, okay. Right. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, in order to keep the peace, oh, let me just go ahead and do it. Right. And the next thing I know, I'm doing the things which to me feel impostery because that's not what
It's
I'm
not you.
that's not what it's not me. It's not what I'm good at. And if you let me do what I'm good at in your life, miracles. Because what I do well, and I know I do it well. But when you put me in a box that doesn't necessarily call out and call up the best things about me, you suffer, I suffer. I'm frustrated with you because you're expecting things that I didn't agree to, right? And I'm not saying expecting things like it's not big things like have kids when I knew, no, that's not going to be that's not my ministry. Kids, I'm a great godmommy, but that's about it, right? So how do you how do we reconcile that? Because I think that when you said who is that 30%, and I didn't want to say white man. I mean, come on. If you move through the world feeling
Yeah.
like I belong here, this is my world, I own this, I make no apologies for it. I'm going
Absolutely.
to ask for, even though the salary says 130, I'm going to ask for 150 and negotiate down to 140. So I'm always going to put myself out there as someone, I'm going to get my stuff with no apologies and no fear because it's mine. It belongs to me. This is my world, right? And so, and I didn't want to say it just because people are like, oh man, white men always have a, I
No,
get
but it
it.
is.
Yeah, I
It
get it.
is.
It
I
is.
wasn't going to say it either.
I mean, so when I think about it, I mean, the realities as I'm talking and listening to myself, kind of grapple with all of this is that I'm going to say this. I'm just going to say it because I've been thinking it and I know it's not popular, but I think in the institution of marriage that women come up short in the institution, like
Oh, yeah.
now back in the day when you had this, he goes, it was a partnership, but now we have women that are making more than their partners, but all of the stuff that comes with it is still there. So there's still the cooking or the cleaning or all the other things. They're just inherently expected, right? Now, that's not all couples. Let me just make sure that I'm just saying not each and every, but I'm just looking at like all my girlfriends who are phenomenal, my close girlfriends, right? Just phenomenal people. And just watching how they kind of bumble and trying to make it all happen and hold up half the sky. And I think the whole world around women, that's like the posturing is inherent in that world. Right. I hope that
Right.
makes sense. I'm off on a tangent, I think, but
No, but it does make sense. And especially like, again, the experience that I had with both of my children of feeling like, so I'm supposed to mother them. And what does being a mother even mean? Because all of y'all look like you got it figured out. I don't even know if I want to be that kind of mother. Like I'm the type of mother that does not need to be with their child at all the time, who like was counting down the days until they went to daycare during my maternity leave. I don't after a weekend, I'm done, like go someplace else. Um, I take vacations without them and all of that. I feel like I should feel guilty. And I think that is me trying to compare myself to the image of what being a mother means that society has given me.
Right.
And same with being a wife. I'm a queer person. I am in a relationship with a cishet man and a black man from the South. And even though, and I'm from Seattle, so we have some cultural
yeah, of course.
going on.
Okay. Yeah.
But at this point that we've been together for almost 10 years, and so we know each other, but like certainly we sent our representatives to the dating scene, like, and some of what I sent when I sent my representative still is in our relationship today. Like cooking.
Mhm.
You know, I used to love cooking before kids. I loved cooking. Now I do it because we have to eat. And even though we never sat down in our relationship to say who's going to be the one that cooks, um, I took on that role.
Mhm.
And occasionally we have conversations about like, okay, babe, how are you going to contribute to dinner this week? And he'll go buy something.
Mhm.
Me being the penny
Mhm.
pincher, I'm like, really? Like, I don't want to eat out because we could just cook. And anyways, that's beyond the point. My point is, even for me, as someone who believes that women, wives, whoever partners in relationships shouldn't be the one that's responsible for like food and grocery shopping,
Mhm.
I still do it. He
Mhm.
doesn't ask me to do it. He doesn't say, wife, your job in this marriage is to raise these kids and go cook me my meals. No, absolutely not. He says, well, if you don't feel like cooking, let's order out. And then I don't want to do that. So I cook. So
It's
I do think, you know, one of the things that when I was thinking about like what triggers the imposter syndrome for me, it's usually around comparing myself to other people that I know or to what I think the gold standard for the thing is. So if it's a legal writing project, I am very insecure about my ability to do legal writing. It's this whole thing. Some people love it. I hate it. Anyways, if I have an assignment, like I'm automatically thinking about the people that can just bang out like a 20-page research memo in like 2 days. And here I am on day 7 at midnight, still trying to research. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
if I'm thinking about motherhood, my first thought goes to the people that I don't even know. Like, I guess to my mother.
Mhm.
Like, and she wouldn't say that she was perfect, but to me, she was perfect. But you know, I compare myself to other people or to what I think the best is. And that is not, it's just not my truth. It's not my reality.
Yeah.
You know, whatever other people, they ain't none of my business.
Right.
You know, they are none of my business. What else is happening and how somebody else is a parent or how somebody else does something is how they do it. Um,
But I don't think, I mean, I think what you're actually talking about underneath all of this is like liberation, right?
mm,
How can we move about the world in a way that's true to who we are?
mhm,
And, you know, there's this ping pong effect of, well, part of one of our little fun things we would do, right? I would lay down in her bed and we would talk, and then she would say, if I won the lotto, and then she would go through and say who would get what. And of course, she would tell me I'd get the most, which she told everybody. But all of us were like, I get the most. And so, but she would talk it through and she says, now remember, and every time she would say, I'm not, whatever you get, you cannot put your partner, your husband, nobody's name goes on it
mm,
because you have to have something that is yours because the person that you marry is not the person you divorce. If
mm,
you go through a divorce with somebody, you're like, how could we get here? Right? Happens a lot. But there's this ping pong effect of my family of origin stuff is get your own stuff, do things because you want to, not because you have to. Be
mm,
with someone that you want to be with, not that you have to be with. Do things and from the very beginning that are things you love to do. So they get used to seeing you fly somewhere for a week at a time. Right. And so I used to like cooking. My partner was like, or my then fiance or partner, I would cook. And sometimes 3 meals a day. And especially during the pandemic, I was like, yeah, you cooking and cooking and cooking, right? It
mm.
was the thing. And then that one time he was like, what did you make? Or what's for dinner? Or something like that. And I was like,
I
oh
ain't
no,
cooking no
see,
more.
that changes from a gift, something that I'm freely doing of free will, to now is part of my job description. I never put that in that was something I was doing for you because I care, right? And so this whole thing about family of origin stuff where it's like you be free, you take care of you, and you bring in someone into your world that is a bonus. If they are not a bonus, then this is not going to work, right? If they are even equal to you. I could do equal, like I'm doing my thing. I need someone who in some way can inspire me or help me lift me up as I do lift them up as well, right? But society is like, you cook. What's your problem? I was listening to Charles Barkley on one of the Sports Center with him and a few other folks. It was Shaq, him, and two other guys. And Shaq said, "Why don't women need watches?" There was a joke. Why don't women need watches? And Charles Barkley said, "Well, because there's a clock on the stove." Right? And I'm like, you're the worst. And that as we just joke about it, that's a real thing now. That that's a real thing, and we joking, haha. But we have to find a way. I think this imposter syndrome for me woke up in me the ways that I move in the world, confined, constrained, don't speak my truth. And then enter into relationships, whether it's a work relationship where you're getting into it and you're like, oh my God, these people don't see me. No. And it can be your church relationships, it could be your family. So where are you that real person? Where is the one place where you know you're not an imposter?
Right.
I have girlfriends where I say the ugly and I'm just like, girl, it's ugly, right?
Absolutely.
But we don't have enough spaces to move around where we can really take the mask off, or what we perceive to be the mask, or even find out, oh, no. This is not a mask. This is actually who I am. The mask is where that's a function of the relationship for me to be in relationship with you, right? So I know I've been kind of rambly, but I'm really wanting any person, particularly women, particularly Black women who are listening to this, is to really do a self-check of, where am I an imposter, and be real about it, and then do something. Goodness, I think about how many things we find out, like, oh my God, it's a revelation, and we do nothing about it. And once the light comes on, once it's hard to turn that off. It starts to really get in your body when you're not being true to yourself. So I'm going to ask you the questions, the way out, or what is the way up, or what do you say, listen, to even be able to think about what you need to do, you have to first acknowledge or accept or think about ...
Yeah, well, I think I want to start by saying that liberation and like true authenticity comes at a risk. And so I think that, like, for what you're making a face.
Yeah, because I just know friends right now that are like juggling that. If I go for me, a lot of people will get hurt.
Exactly. So I think that when we're talking about like how to move forward, move upward from our imposter syndrome, that we do need to do an evaluation, assess what the risk is. And is that risk worth it? Because maybe, I don't know, if it's a job, maybe we need that job right now. And so if I can't be authentic at work, or if I feel like my authenticity at work is going to create drama that I don't have emotional energy for, or mental energy for, or maybe my job will be on the line and I actually need that money, then where else can we go in our lives where we don't have to be these imposters? And you mentioned, your friends. And I too, I have a sister circle, a whole dang sister circle. And I experienced something recently at work that had me coming home saying, I shouldn't even do this podcast because I am that much of an imposter that I should not even do this podcast. So I slept on it. I woke up the next morning, sent this text, we mostly text, to my sister circle saying, y'all, this is what happened. I need your prayers or vibes or thoughts or whatever you want to send me, positive affirmations, because like the situation sucked, but what sucks even more is now I'm living deeply in this imposter syndrome and I'm not quite sure how to get out. And
Mm.
they send me all these messages about like, duh, like this is exactly why you need to do this
Right.
podcast.
Right.
And they're really real with me, and they sent me great examples of things that I've done and da 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 da. But like having that community to go to. I told my husband this and he was like, well, guess you ain't gonna be going out on a limb for them people anymore. Like just people who they all have their different perspectives,
Yeah.
but being able to be honest with me about like, one, is there a lesson learned for me and like why I'm feeling like an imposter? Or if I did something wrong, like here, I'm not sure if I did something wrong or not. So like, is there a lesson learned? But two, helping to affirm and validate who I am externally so that I can take those cues internal. And so I think those are two things, but I think humility too. And like acknowledging our humanity and your thing, Grace. So if I back up, for me, imposter syndrome is I have whatever standard of myself that essentially I'll never meet, I'll never attain. And because I never attain it, I'm faking it. That doesn't make sense to anybody outside of anybody's head, but mine, like it makes sense to me. But I feel like I can relieve that anxiety through just acknowledging that I'm human, that I can only do so much.
Limitation.
I can only, I only have so much energy. And I still have a lot to learn in essentially every aspect of my life. There's nothing about me that I'm like, oh yeah, I got that down pat. Like mothering, no. Lawyering, no. Wifing, no. Cooking, no. Financing, no. There ain't nothing in my life that I'm like, yep, that's the thing. And that's okay. Like my goal in life doesn't have to be perfection in all aspects of my life. Like I don't like living with the stress of trying to be perfect, let alone actually being perfect.
Right.
So I think for me, like those two like tools, the having the community that I can go to, who I can hear from, and having them like tell it back to me what I just said to you. Because like when a friend, if a friend came to me saying the things that I was saying to them, I'd be like, you're amazing.
Right.
But I can't say that to myself for some reason. So like having the friend tell it back to me so that I can look at the insanity of it all. But then also bringing my ego down a notch. To remember that I'm human, allowing myself grace to work through whatever it is that I'm working through, or to feel the feelings that I need to feel, or to make a mistake, or to be amazing. Because that's part of it too, is that when I am amazing, I'm like, that was luck. That just happened to have happened. I'm not really sure how that happened. It wasn't the 100 hours I put into it. It was just, I don't know why that happened. So allowing myself to feel proud of my accomplishments, allowing myself to like marinate in the goodness, the things, the successes, whatever that success is, thing. I think it's a thing, and maybe it's even, I don't know if I'm going to go so far as call it a tool, but maybe it's a tool of survival, of making it, of doing the thing, if that's how we need to do the thing. When it doesn't align with our values, or when it's hurting our soul, or when it's preventing us from doing the next thing, when it's holding us back and we're missing opportunities, or we're unhappy because we're in a relationship that we sent our representative to, and now we're having a hard time like peeling back the representative, then yeah, that's a problem. It's a problem for me when that happens. It leads to anxiety and depression and shame and all that. But I do think that it's complicated in some respects.
I think it's complicated and like everything else, everything is complex. We're humans, right? And so I think it's a tool, absolutely. But I think that we either forget that it's actually a tool and we can use it or not use it. And I think that's what makes it good, is when cognitively, oh, this is a tool that I'm using. But I think like a lot of things, we forget that it's a tool, and then we don't need to do that thing over here, or we don't need to be that way anymore. And we just continue to do things on autopilot, right? And so I think it's a point of privilege. Even this conversation, just kind of, there's a point of privilege here to be able to contemplate life and contemplate, the ways that we can change and move a little better, and not because we're not focused on, okay, well, how am I going to feed my kids? We're not focused on how I'm going to keep my roof over my head, right? That's a different conversation. But I really do believe that while it is a point of privilege, we always have access to our greater person, right? Our greater being. It's just hard to access it when you're surviving and coming from a place where of fear and lack, right? So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And just for people who are listening, who are in a position where, or point in their journey where there's a lot of struggle and a lot of unknowns and uncertainty, it's real. And I want to acknowledge, like, it is real not to be able to indulge in these conversations right now. But even to that person, I would say within you is a force that's there to part the seas for you, to move to that next destination. And you can always take 5 minutes to say, come on, come through me, use me, I'm here. Like, and it's a system. Now that's a system and a tool that you can activate that really does lift you up. One last thing that I wanted to say, and then I'll have you kind of close this out.
Okay.
Is just about, I've been recently doing a lot of inventory and thinking about, well, where am I free? And I am, when I think about the upcoming 2024 elections, I am like, I don't feel free in this country all the time. And so I've been on these websites, they have expats who are in different places and Black women who are in different places. And one of the places I've been really looking at is Costa Rica. And I want to be able to go, because I can only imagine. I mean, one woman said, I haven't locked my door in years. I don't even remember the last time I locked my door. I just want to be free, and in this country, there's so much navigating my body, navigating my thoughts, my beliefs, my values, and where I'm accepting, where I'm not. The Black woman decision tree. If I say this is going to happen, okay, well, no, yes, then, okay. I don't want to do that anymore. That is what perpetuates imposter syndrome. And so, like, my whole thing is about liberation. So in the spirit of liberation and women kind of actually being able to stop and look at the impostrix and how it is to own it, understand it, and rise above the imposter syndrome. What are some of your closing thoughts?
I'll speak for myself in that I feel free in my home. And our home is purposeful. The location of our home is purposeful, that we have nature around our home and we can't see the street from our home. And it's a safe space for me so far. And that's, it's not untouchable by any stretch of the imagination. But when you first said, like, for you, you've been thinking about where are you free in liberation? Like, that's the first thing that came to me, is that my home place is my centering place, and it's where I feel the most peace. And then also in my marriage and my relationship and with my children. But what I also thought about, and the reason why I included that I'm a Black mother to Black children, is that it is thinking about the election and thinking about where the United States is going, where this world is going. And it's terrifying and exhaustingly terrifying to be someone who loves someone that's Black, who loves two Black boy children. One of my children's autistic. It's terrifying. And I don't know what to do about that, but I do a lot of work. I do therapy. I'm a big therapy advocate. You guys have heard me talk about my sister circle. I'm a sister circle advocate. And those things, I'm also somebody that's in long-term recovery, and I have a recovery community. So, for me, it's really having both a physical space for me to feel safe, as well as a community of people for me to feel safe around. And I think, for me, that's what I want to create for listeners of Impostrix podcast, is that community where we can find safety and healing through sharing our stories, through educating each other, through validating our lived experience, instead of having to highlight, I don't know, our grades and our profession, and, just acknowledging each other as like experts of ourselves. And that's enough.
That's great. So we have a standing tradition here that we do at the end of the show, and it is a fill in the blank. Grace is
allowing myself to be human and allowing that in others.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly what it is. Yeah.
Oh, dang.
That's exactly how I see it. That is exactly. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Whitney Knox Lee. Is your website up?
Yeah. Yes. www.impostrixpodcast.com. I am on social media, sort of barely. You can find me at Instagram at Impostrix Podcast, and on LinkedIn at Whitney Knox Lee. I'm super grateful to be here. And
I will be looking for you in July. And, would love to be on your show,
Yes, absolutely.
I definitely want to thank you for bringing this conversation to light, especially given the country that we live in and the world we live in, and how we navigate and what we've learned to do as a matter of survival. And this conversation for me, dealing with the imposter, is a liberation conversation. So thank you so much. And I'll see you in July.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Thank you.